Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Hannah Booth and I'm the Communications Manager here at Morpay. It's my pleasure to introduce the topic to you for this session, which is handling disciplinaries and dismissals. Where dismissals can't be avoided, it's crucial employers follow a fair dismissal procedure to minimise the risk of unfair dismissal claims and potential reputational damage. So in today's webinar, my colleague Carl will take you through the fundamentals of handling dismissals in the context of disciplinary. A few things to cover before we do get started this morning. First of all, you'll have noticed your microphone is on mute. We do want to hear from you, especially for the Q&A session at the end of the main presentation. So you can drop your questions into the question panel as shown here. We've had an incredible response to the webinar with over 1,000 people registering, so we will get through as many questions as we can at the end of the session. I know we'll have quite a few. Another note, if you are facing any technical difficulties, don't worry too much. We will be sending you a recording of the webinar and also a copy of the slides later on today. However, if you are facing technical difficulties, please do flag it in the question panel, because if lots of them do come flooding through, I'll know there's an issue at our end and I can do my best to try and fix that. So moving on to the agenda for today, Carl will start off by running through some examples of conduct issues in the workplace. He'll then take you through the difference between misconduct, serious misconduct and gross misconduct. Carl will also walk you through the ACAS Code of Practice in relation to disciplinary and grievance procedures. In addition, we'll look at short service dismissals and automatic unfair dismissals before discussing some common pitfalls to avoid. Before I hand over to Carl, I'm conscious that we will have some people on the webinar this morning that aren't familiar with Morpay, so I'll give you a very brief introduction. We provide payroll and HR software as well as outsourcing services to UK businesses. We've been around since 1960. Have all the accreditations you'd expect, and we're rated excellent on Trustpilot. Our promise is to make payroll and HR easy, and here's how we do it. We've built payroll and HR software that's easy. We deliver quality outsourcing options, and all of this means worry-free compliance for businesses. On the slide, you can see some of the businesses who trust us to take care of their payroll and HR. So that's enough from me. Let's meet our presenter for this morning. If you've attended in the past, hi Carl.
Hello, good morning.
Carl. Carl's an employment law consultant at Morpay and worked here for over 12 years, and he specialises in disciplinary. So without further ado, I will hand over to Carl to take you through this morning's session. Thank you, Carl.
Okay. Thank you, Hannah. Sorry for diving in, Hannah. I'm just keen to get
started.
No
worries.
We've got quite a lot to get through today. I just want to go over, before we get into the meat of the presentation, some things Hannah said. We're keen today to be a two-way process. Use a question box. I'd really like a lively Q&A session at the end. I think that's often be very useful, and no need to take notes. As Hannah mentioned, the notes are provided and the recording is provided also. But after saying that, today is not death by a kind of PowerPoint. I think I've only got 8 slides today. So what I'd rather do is chat through the scenarios, chat through how to do things, have a chat through about how to manage expectations, both your staff and your management, and also keep you on the inside of the law. And just a little caveat before I get to this first slide. I have an employment law joke at the end. It's the first time I've ever done it. It's to do with a dismissal. I appreciate it's a dad joke, but it'll take me 10 seconds, so please go easy on me. Okay, let's turn our attention to the first slide. Today we're looking at disciplinaries and dismissal. Well, I want to add a third section into that we've not put actual on the slides, and that is tribunal. If you manage disciplinaries correctly, if you manage dismissals correctly, you avoid tribunals, or you avoid a serious tribunal that can result in a lot of loss. Now, why do we discipline? Why do we dismiss? Well, there's 3 reasons. The first reason is natural justice. It's the right thing to do. The second reason is, Hannah's touched on it, reputational damage. Are you getting a reputation as being a hire and fire organisation? So we do our disciplinaries and dismissals fairly. And the third reason I've touched upon is to avoid tribunal whenever you can. I've spent countless hours in tribunals over many years, and they are not nice places to be. And even though you're all on mute, I appreciate a lot of you that have been through that procedure will be nodding your head with that. That has been compounded in recent years. It used to cost money for an employee to take you to tribunal. That changed, rightly or wrongly, I have no comment on, but right now, an ex-employee or even a current employee can go to tribunal for free. They don't have to pay for a representative, they can represent themselves. So there is a very low bar of you heading up in tribunal. So the more secure your disciplinaries are, the more secure your dismissals are, then the less chance of tribunal. Okay, let me have a look at the examples of conduct issues within the workplace. I'm not going to read through that slide because you've all stared at it for quite a while now, but let's look at from left to right. It goes from less serious stuff, and on the right hand side is the more serious stuff. Poor attendance. It's a popular myth that you can't discipline somebody for being poorly. I will come on to that later, but people that have earache, toothache, lost the keys, late for the bus, you can discipline for poor attendance. They may say, it's not my fault, but you can actually do that. Down at the bottom under the yellow coloured box, failure to follow management instructions. Under certain circumstances, that can be gross misconduct. So we're now getting into the more serious side of the slide on the right. Bullying and harassment, that's fairly obvious. Misuse of company IT equipment. That's a bit of a euphemism for pornography and for gambling sites, but it can be far wider than that. It can be somebody that's downloading your profit margins, your customer base. And I recently dealt with a case where one sales guy used his company iPhone to jam open a hotel door. Misuse of company IT equipment. It's the first time I've ever seen that, but nevertheless, it was a disciplinary offence because he shattered the screen. So we'll start off in the shallow end, if you like, of the disciplinary and talk about general misconduct, and then we'll end up as time progresses. And I know Hannah will come and beat me with a stick if I don't stick to timescales, but we'll get involved in the more serious stuff, the more kind of gross misconduct and nasty things like that. But Hannah, if we could just move the slide to general misconduct, please. Okay, now one thing I need to make you aware of, and I'm sure lots of HR people will know this, is there is a 2-year rule. So something that is misconduct, if your staff are under 2 years service, and we'll deal with that later, you can treat misconduct far more seriously than if they've got more than 2 years service. So let's have a look at that slide in front of us. And again, I'm not going to read that slide. It's there for posterity should you wish. If you have a look at point 2 towards the lower end of the slide, we need to have a full and fair procedure, usually in line with the ACAS Code of Practice. More about that later. Hannah hinted at it, but I'm going to take you through the ACAS Code of Practice. We need to do that. That's not something that's optional. That's something that can bite you very hard if you've not done it in tribunal. There's a certain procedure to follow. You may agree with it as HR professionals, you may disagree with it as HR professionals, but nevertheless, it is the law. And the third one is make a balanced decision. And there's a reason the word balanced is kind of bolded out. Should you end up in tribunal, I've got to say this with my tongue in my cheek, but officially a tribunal judge cannot put himself in your shoes. So what you've got to demonstrate is it was a balanced and consistent and as fair as possible decision. Your MD stamping his feet saying the guy's got to go is not a reason. It is you that have to make a balanced, consistent and fair reason. Now, misconduct can be general day-to-day misbehavior, lateness, you know as well as I do, we've all seen it 1,000 times, absenteeism, somebody that is absent next Tuesday when we've had a bank holiday Monday, surprise, surprise. It's typically the lower end of the scale of warnings. It normally results in a written warning or a verbal warning, and I will come on to talk about how to get there in a little while, but it's meant to be a corrective measure. It's not meant to be a stick to hit your employees with. You have been late twice in the last 3 months. I'm going to give you a written warning. The idea is you coerce your employees into getting better rather than using it as a punishment. I've often found that the theatre of the disciplinary is a bit of a wake-up. Once official letters start flying to an employee about attending meetings, attending hearings, trade union reps can attend, they realise things have got serious fairly quickly. So rather than just a supervisor or a manager saying, oh, you need to attend more often, or you need to make sure you don't bash the photocopier, once things get serious, the employee knows they get serious, and there can often be a great wake-up. Okay, and before we go on to the next slide, I'm sure a lot of you out there appreciate how disciplinaries work and what the warnings are, but it's effectively a totting up procedure. So somebody does some misconduct, as we've seen on this slide, they'll probably end up after fair procedure getting a written warning. Okay, if their behaviour does not improve, we'll go through the same procedure again, and they may end up with a final warning. So effectively, we're building on that written warning. Surprise, surprise, the clues in the title, final warning. If they don't improve again, then the next stage is dismissal. It's known as a contractual dismissal. It's not a gross misconduct dismissal, but essentially you get what you want, which is the person in your firm are not performing, and they are gone after 3 strikes and you're out. Okay, let's move on to serious misconduct, please, Hannah. Okay, serious misconduct, and we'll go through the slide, but it's things that just stop short of gross misconduct. Now, a lot of people say to me, well, I'm not sacking him, where's the risk? If I give somebody a final warning, why do I have to do it properly? It's going to stay on his file or her file for 12 months. I'm not sacking them. There's no risk. And the answer is there's a huge risk. In the event you go on and dismiss from this point in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whenever, the claimant's lawyers, if you end up in tribunal, will look at the foundations of the dismissal. So they'll have a look at the dismissal and think, crikey, there's not much there. And they'll have a look at the first and final warning that happened 6 months prior to the dismissal. So they'll hack away at your foundations. So it is important that you get it right and that it is solid. They'll look at procedure. Okay, now we've talked about stacking warnings, written warnings, final written warnings, and ultimately dismissal. Some of you may have worked out I've not used the phrase verbal warning. ACAS have kind of pulled the rug on those. You can go straight to a written. But what we can do is get straight to a first and final written warning. I appreciate today's been really wordy, and I apologise about that. But you know, hopefully, I'm pitching it okay for you. Hopefully. A first and final written warning is a warning in isolation. So as you can see there on the second paragraph, it's somebody does something, and we can talk about examples, that just stops them being fired for a one-off issue. Typically, it's an employee in a hotel not doing the banking, so they leave £2,000 on the counter rather than in the safe. That gets stolen. So the employee has not stolen it, but due to their massive failure of procedure, the hotel is £2,000 down. So typically, it is just stopping short of dismissal. It's exceptionally serious. An employee with a live first and final written warning, typically it's on file for 12 months. So any further misbehaviour over the next 12 months may result in dismissal. So effectively, they've got to behave like a nun for the next 12 months, otherwise they're down the road. It's the absolute kind of zenith of warnings before we get to a dismissal. Okay, Hannah, can we move on to gross misconduct, please? Okay, I'm going to read this slide, even though I've told you that I wasn't going to read slides, but I think it's important to do. Examples of gross misconduct. is theft and fraud, fairly obvious. Fighting, physical assault, threatening behaviour. Serious incapacity to work due to alcohol and non-prescribed drugs, i.e. Drunk at work or even under the influence at work of either alcohol or illicit drugs. While I'm on this, if somebody says, yes, I'm under the influence on alcohol because I'm an alcoholic, being an alcoholic is not a disability. You can still dismiss for that. A lot of people think it is, but it is not. So, discriminatory conduct and bullying harassment. That's fairly obvious. I've got a slide on discriminatory. Serious insubordination, damage to property, deliberately accessing internet sites that contain offensive material. I can leave that to your own imaginations what they are. Here at Morpay, we deal with quite a few distressing cases where people deliberately access things on the internet that they should not. And bizarrely, I would assume it'd be mainly men. It's a 50-50 split between men and women, but you know, it's a modern world. Serious breaches of health and safety rules or procedures. So if somebody's not working in a safe way, it can be gross misconduct. Two reasons for that. They're not working in a safe way, which may harm themselves and others. But the second is in the event of an accident and you have a personal injury claim against you and you took no action, the judge in that case may assume that you don't care about health and safety. It's not important to you. So in the event people are not working in a safe way, and a lot of our clients are in heavy engineering and accidents are a massive thing, if you kind of give them a verbal warning or a letter of concern, then you've kind of made things worse for yourself rather than better. And finally, evidence that a grievance has been brought by an employee in bad faith. If you have a grievance, one of your employees says, my manager has done X, Y, and Z to me. If that is malicious, they're only doing it to get their manager into bother because they won't give them overtime or they're just come out of a relationship with them or whatever, that can be gross misconduct. The problem about this slide, it needs to be about 17 miles long because it's impossible to list every single act of gross misconduct. But as a general rule of thumb, and this is how the law looks at it, the employment relationship has irrevocably broken down. There is no way back. Okay. Again, I'm not here to sell, but all I can say, the customers of ours, phone the advice line as soon as you can. We'll guide you through it. And should things go wrong and you end up in tribunal, the insurance should pay for it if you followed our rules. The key is you get on top of things fairly early and give us a call. If you're not a client and don't wish to be a client, and I accept that may be the case, please get some professional help, because even if you we'll look at any one of them, theft or fraud. If you catch your employee, and this is how the world we live in, you catch your employee in the handbag of your MD stealing £50 out of her purse, and you sack them on the spot, you will go to tribunal and lose. Okay, I'll come on to the procedure shortly, but even if something's plain and obvious, you can still end up at the wrong side of a tribunal. You may think, well, I've done nothing wrong. You probably have not done nothing wrong, but that's how the law looks at it. So what we need to do now is, we've taught what the warnings are, but what we now need to discuss is how do we get there safely. So if I can ask Hannah to knock it onto the next slide. By the way, just before dial the next slide, the advice line here runs 24/7, 365. So even if you have two chefs fighting at 10 o'clock at night, and believe me, from somebody that goes on call, it happens, just give us a call straight away. You don't have to think we're a 9-to-5 operation. We are not. Give us a call when it happens. Okay, when you look at this slide, this is not me making you jump through lots of pointless hoops when the obvious is straight in your face. There is something called the ACAS Code of Practice. And if you don't follow this advice and you end up in tribunal or don't follow this practice, the judge will uplift it of an award by 25%. So if you skip part of this, or don't do any of it. If your employee wins £10,000 off you in tribunal, the judge may increase that to 12.5. So it's important that we follow this. It's not a MOPE thing, it's a legal thing, and we've got to do it. Okay, so let's have a look at it. First of all, establish the facts of the case or the incident. Most tribunals are won and lost at this point, or most disciplinaries are secured at this point. It's easy to jump to conclusions. You need to establish the facts of what's gone on. The second thing you need to do is inform the employee of the problem. We're not happy with how you've treated a company car, or we're not happy with X, and you need to give some account of that. Now, before we jump from 2 to 3, again by law, this time it's case law, but don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with that. We've got to give a minimum of 48 hours. So we invite the employee to be accompanied at a meeting by a trade union colleague or a trade union rep or a colleague. That's a legal obligation. I have conversations with clients and they say, well, he's not in a trade union. Can I take that out of the invite letter? Or we don't have trade unions on our site. It doesn't matter. It's a legal right for one to be there. You never know, his next door neighbour, maybe a trade union rep or his brother-in-law, he has that right. The fourth point on there at the bottom middle is the disciplinary. Hold a meeting to discuss the problem with the employee, and again, give them a opportunity to come up with their side of the story. So effectively, the employee has 2 bites of the cherry. The fifth one, decide on the appropriate action. And we've mentioned warnings before, and we've mentioned gross misconduct before. We follow the same procedure. So is it something fairly lightweight, where we give a written warning? Is it something serious, where we give a first and final warning? Or is it something that's beyond the pale? Is it gross misconduct? And then the point 6, we have an opportunity of appeal, and we have a legal obligation to do that. And it can be quite useful, actually. I know people think, oh, crikey, I'm sick and fed up of having these meetings, but it's the last chance before tribunal. You'll get an indication of what the tribunal may look like, because that's what the appeal will look like. I am not happy that you've ignored Joe Bloggs as evidence. I am not happy you've not looked at CCTV. It gives you a final chance to make sure your ducks in a row before the die is cast. Okay, so let's move on to some quirky disciplinaries. Okay, Hannah, if you can just nudge the slide on. I mentioned at the top of this webinar that staff need 2 years service for unfair dismissal. So anybody with less than 2 years service can be dismissed under short service dismissals. Okay, the government over many years have changed that 2 years. I've known it being 6 months service, 12 months service, but it's currently 2 years. So anybody with less than 2 years service does not have the right for unfair dismissal. They can moan about you down the pub, they can spout out on Facebook, but they cannot take you to tribunal for unfair dismissal. But I just have a quick look at your handbook that you've got it in there, that you do have a short service procedure in there. Okay, otherwise it technically can be a breach of contract. But if you're a client of ours, it's almost certainly there. But a short service dismissal, they have no right for unfair dismissal. So if they don't put the teaspoons back in the jar correctly, if they park in the wrong spot, as long as you are consistent, you can dismiss. But I want to draw your attention to that bottom paragraph, the bottom paragraph in black, please. It's not always straightforward to dismiss staff through short service. If you make an error, it could lead to a very expensive tribunal claim. Sometimes disciplinaries, dismissals, employment law in general is counterintuitive. You can think, well, this guy's only been with me 6 weeks. I'm not happy due to his absenteeism levels. I'll just fire him. It's important you take professional advice. It's not as simple as that. Again, if you're a client of ours, fantastic. If you're not a client of ours, please be a client. But even if you're not a client and don't want to be a client, please take some professional advice. I often find the quote-unquote simple dismissals under 2 years can be the most expensive in tribunal, because things are rushed through, things are not explored fully, and what happens is we dismiss somebody for high absenteeism, turns out they've got cancer and we've a massive disability claim on our hands. So it's important that you take advice, or if you're a professional HR person, going back to my earlier slide, you dig into quite a bit of detail, follow a process, follow a procedure. Okay. Now, let me give you some areas of pitfalls, just some, there are many. Again, I'm getting technical, so I'll put my anorak on. Okay, can we just nip back a slide, please, Hannah? Thank you. Yeah, I've now got my anorak on, you'll be pleased to learn. These are, I was about to say day one rights. An employee has these from day one, but often some of these rights you see here, once a candidate sends in a CV, they are protected. So if they've zero service or even less than zero service, they have certain rights that you can, if it's anything connected to it, and we will talk through it, I'm just looking at the clock, we're doing fine for time, is that any of these characteristics, any of these play a format in the decision to discipline or dismiss, can be very explosive. Okay, the top bullet points: age, race, sex, gender reassignment, disability, religion, belief, or pregnancy. Again, it's religion or belief. There was a case recently where somebody, I'm not sure if they won or not, but they were dismissed because they believed the BBC should be free for all, and it was a genuinely held belief. And it went quite a long way in court, did that. So if somebody's got a genuine belief and not a frivolous one, then again you can be held against that. Second issue, family-related issues. The traditional maternity, paternity, adoption, or shared parental leave. So if somebody is dismissed for that, I'll be honest with you, the tribunal is a very, very short thing. It doesn't last long. Once the judge establishes that they have been dismissed due to that, irrespective of their service, irrespective of the circumstances surround it, it will be an automatic unfair dismissal. Clues in the title, automatic. Okay, trade union membership or association with a trade union. So if somebody with 6 months service says, I'm thinking about joining a trade union, or I've just joined a trade union, and you think, well, I can't be bothered with that hassle, I'm going to sack them, it's an automatic unfair dismissal. We're going to come on to what they'd get in tribunal in a little while, but nevertheless, trade union membership is protected. And likewise, refusal to carry out tasks that would be in breach of health and safety regulations. If you say to one of your office workers, I'd like to you to rewire the air conditioning, and they've no electrical qualifications, and they refuse, and you fire them because of it, then again, that would be automatically unfair. Now, while I'm on this slide, I'm keen that we're detailed on all our dismissal letters. The danger is we get fairly British about things, and we say to staff, even with short service, it's not working out, you're not fitting in. Okay, and that's the nice cuddly way of doing it, but I've seen many cases where that bites you very hard on the bottom. It's not working out, and then they go to court because, yeah, it's not working out, and I'm gay and everybody else is straight, I'm black, white, young, old, whatever protected characteristics. So when you do a dismissal, it's key that you actually get to the heart of the reasons of the dismissal and not put euphemisms in, not to hurt feelings. Regretfully, if you do that, it can come back and cause you problems. It's key to always have tons of paperwork throughout a dismissal. Okay, an old barrister of mine is no longer with us, regretfully. Once said to me, witnesses lose you cases and paper wins cases. So the more paper you have, the more you can put under the judge's nose: investigation notes, disciplinary notes, appeal notes, outcome letters, the safer your case will be. So that is key. Okay, let's come on to the common pitfalls that we see. So if we can move on to the next slide. Okay, we've talked about this 2-year rule. Okay, and that is vitally important. But common pitfalls is if we dismiss somebody 1 day short of their 2-week work anniversary, what we've done is rightly messed up, because remember, they've got their statutory notice on top. So by definition, even though they've only worked for you for less than 2 years, add on their notice, their statutory notice, not contractual notice, statutory notice, they've gained 2 years service. So you're in trouble. Assuming that there are no consequences to dismissing an employee with under 2 years service, they can be huge. The most expensive case are the most boring cases initially, where you'll say to somebody, you've less than 2 years service, we're dismissing you for whatever reason, and then all of a sudden it turns out they've significant mental health issues, that's why they didn't phone in correctly, disability discrimination, and that can be very expensive. And it then nicely brings me on to that third point of not carrying out a sufficiently thorough investigation. It's keen under every circumstance we establish facts. What you think is obvious may not be obvious. I had a case once where it was, I won't mention the name of the garage, but it's a famous petrol retailer, and they had to shell out quite a bit of money. You can read what you want into that. They have a loyalty card, and often what happens is cashiers skim a card. So if you go in and fill up your car and you don't have a loyalty card, the guy behind the till waits 30 seconds while you're gone and gets the points for themselves, and that results in cash back and things like that. This company had I've got a fraud prevention unit, and they called a client of ours and said, just to let you know, this card is doing roughly £300 a day, and the really weird thing is doing petrol and it's doing diesel. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know any cars that run on both. So she overlaid the dates of the card skim over the shift, and only one person was on shift. So she thought, hey, presto, we've got our man. He claimed he didn't know anything about it. We took him through the full procedure, investigation, disciplinary, appeal, all the way through. He just shrugged his shoulders and said, nothing to do with me. We fired him at the end of it. Because we fired him, the owner of the business had to work the tills. She was working one day while she was trying to recruit a replacement. A chap walked in, handed over the loyalty card that she remembered because she'd been looking at that number of the loyalty card for many, many months. And she froze and she said, how did you get this? And he said, well, I work for the garage round the corner, the Nissan garage. And when we sell a car, one of the sales guys nips round, fills it up, and then we all use the same loyalty card. And at Christmas, we all have a bit of a payout. And she was sick. It's because she thought she'd established the facts, but she had not. So not carrying out a sufficiently thorough investigation is important. Even if you think the facts are obvious, they are sometimes not. Again, not following a fair procedure, it's law. There's no two ways about it. I mentioned before, and I'll mention it again, a judge can uplift any award by up to 25% if you've not followed a fair procedure. And the final one is the jump before you are pushed. We've all been in meetings where somebody said to the minute taker, can you just pop the pen down for a minute? Please don't do that. Please don't make that mistake. If you say to somebody, look, it's looking really bad for you, why don't you resign? We live in a world of smartphones. You are more than likely going to be recorded. And it's important that you don't do that, because there's loads of case law that if you force somebody to resign, it's a dismissal. Okay, it can be expensive. Now, speaking of expense, if I can take it onto my final slide. Thank you. I mentioned fair disciplinaries. I've mentioned fair procedure. I mentioned the ACAS guide. This is the real pointy end of the stick. This is what a tribunal can hold against you if you've not done things properly and fairly, and all the points we've recently discussed. Right, why are they in 5 different columns? Surely a tribunal will say, well, you've been unfairly dismissed, here's 20 grand or 30 grand or whatever. How tribunals work when they give, it's called remedy, but I'm not going to bore you with that. But in the outcome, what they'll do is give a basic award. That's unfair dismissal, and that can be up to £17,130 there. It's typically the basic award is what they get under redundancy. It's not redundancy, but the calculation is pretty similar. On top of that, on top of their basic award, and emphasize the words on top, they would get compensation. Okay. As you can see there, it's a frightening amount, 93,878, or a year's salary if this is lower. So things are pretty stacking up fairly seriously, fairly quickly. Additional award, I'm not going to bore you with that, but it can be in certain aggravating circumstances, give an additional award on top of the compensation. And the really frightening thing is the discrimination award. That is unlimited. Okay, the recent highest is 4.4 million, and it is not means tested. So if you are Microsoft or you are a small charity employing one person, the discrimination award doesn't matter if you can afford it or not. It is a lot of money. So again, seek professional advice early on. Ideally use us, but it's important you seek professional advice. And the breach of contract, that's often quite lower than the maximum of £25,000. But you can see if you've got 2, 3, 4, or 5 of those, it can be a little bit eye-watering to fall foul of fair procedure, fair practice in the disciplinary process. Now, I did threaten you with a little joke, didn't I? But just before I hand you back to my colleague for the Q&A session, did you hear about the bloke who got sacked from Alton Towers? He went for funfair dismissal. I do apologise. I do apologise. I can now hear the tumbleweed rolling. Okay, so if I can hand you back to Hannah, and hopefully we can get stuck into some Q&A. But thanks for your time today. Over to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Carl. I'm sure you'll all agree that was a fantastic presentation. So moving into the Q&A session, we have received quite a few questions so far, but please do keep dropping them into the question panel and we will get through as many as we can. Also, if you are interested in finding out more about our HR services and advice line offering, then again, just drop a message into the Q&A box and I can ask someone to contact you about that. So let's get started with the first question. So the first question is, can we dismiss an employee who has been sent to prison?
Very good question. The answer is maybe. It depends. First of all, if they've been sent down for something like fraud and they are an accountant, then almost certainly. If they've been sent down for a week and they've got long service, possibly not. But if they've got a lengthy prison sentence, you can dismiss them. It's called frustration of contract, that they cannot provide the contractual duties. And I know I've got my anorak back on now. But yes, all you do is, after no procedure, bizarrely, from what I've just been saying, is write to them at HMP, wherever, and dismiss them through for they not being able to service their contract. But yes, somebody gets sent down, there's reputational damage, there's operational damage, take advice, but yes, you can. Okay.
Thank you, Carl. So the next question, it is quite a long one, so I will just reduce it down a little, but the question is, if someone is on a 6-month probation with a 3-month review, followed by a final review before the 6 months, would the same steps apply? It's less about behaviour and more about mistakes. So there's been a number of issues that have been taking place. And really what they're wanting to know is, should we be following the same steps as with someone who has served past their probation but are under the 2 years of service?
Okay, a very good question. There's a word that you've not heard so far today, and that's probation. I'll let you into a little secret. Probation has got no place in law. You can pass somebody's probation and sack them the same day and dismiss them the same day. What you've got to do is have fair procedure, but probation is an in-house term. If somebody's passed probation or extended probation, or it's the 2-year rule. Anything you do with extending probation or passing probation or failing probation and putting on some more probation doesn't matter. It's internal. Effectively, probation is 2 years. That's when the point they get unfair dismissal. Okay.
Thank you, Carl. We've also had a few questions around the 48 hours notice, so I'll group them together. So the first question was, during these 48 hours, can we suspend the employee from work until the meeting? And then another person has thought, go on, answer that one first, and then I'll move on to the next one. That's probably easier.
Okay, all good. The short answer is if it's exceptionally serious, you must suspend. The reason behind that is if you let them work, your argument in tribunal is they committed violence, fraud, robbery, whatever, and we're now claiming the employment relationship is broken down. Your employer's argument was you knew that, but or suspected that, but you let me work, so the employment relationship hasn't broken down. Okay, so yes, you'd normally suspend. If it's something less serious, a written warning, even a first and final written warning, you're speaking to a Yorkshireman, so I'd let them work during those 48 hours because you need to pay them wages. I'd like to get something back, but yes, you can make them work. But if it's potentially gross misconduct, suspend with pay. And yeah, the reason it's with pay. Okay, sorry, there's a delay on the line, Hannah. I promise I'm not over talking you. There's a reason for paying them is because they don't suffer. If you don't suspend them without pay, they will argue it's a kangaroo court because they've already suffered a detriment. They're not being paid. Okay, Hannah, back to you.
Thank you, Carl. So the next question that we've received is, if an employee that has been suspended fails to attend either the investigation meeting or disciplinary hearing, does 48 hours notice need to be given for each reschedule?
There's only one reschedule, and that, because this time will fact dependent, we'll hear it in their absence if they don't attend. Part of suspension is they make themselves available to you, whether that be an investigation or whether that be a disciplinary. If they're not making themselves available to you, on that day they haven't made themselves available to you, do not pay them suspension pay. Okay, Hannah.
Thank you. So the next question that we've received is, at the established facts part, if the allegations are so serious, would you perhaps initiate suspension before investigation?
Potentially, depending on what the facts are. Suspension is meant to be a neutral thing, a holding thing, but quite often there's a stigma attached to it. So what I try to do is get a good feeling about something, and it's a lazy adage, but I'm going to use it. Once the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, suspend at that point. The danger is you suspend too early, and everybody around the factory floor knows about it, and the guy's done nothing wrong. So yeah, I'd have a brief fact find, a very brief fact find, may take you 10-15 minutes, and if you think, crikey, there's something not right here, suspend at that point. So the next question we've got is, what is the time frame for getting back to someone on the outcome of their disciplinary? For example, if you hold a meeting and you need to investigate aspects of their response further, how long can you take to provide someone with an outcome? Yeah, the law looks at without unreasonable delay, which is not very helpful at all, is it? Because what's reasonable? If it's straightforward, they'd expect you to get back within 48 hours. If you need to go back and reinvestigate, re-interview witnesses, your witnesses on holiday, because right now a lot of people are, regretfully not us, we're all at work, then a delay of 2-3 weeks. But the key is that you write to your employee and let them know what's happening, you know, the holding letter, if you so wish. So if you get there too soon, okay, then it looks like a knee-jerk reaction. If you get there too late, it looks like you don't care about the situation. But if you can evidence that you're undergoing further work and not ignoring them, a delay is absolutely fine, but I'd let your employee know the reason for the delay.
Carl,
okay.
So the next question is, when should the investigation notes be given to the employee? At what stage in the process?
Okay, typically they are stapled to the disciplinary investigation. Sorry, the disciplinary meeting. So the investigation notes are stapled to the disciplinary invite. The reason for the 48 hours is case law suggests that the employee should have access to the investigation notes, statements, anything like that, so they can form their own defence. but the short answer is chuck them in the same envelope as the disciplinary invite. Okay.
Thanks, Carl. That's really useful. So the next question that we've got is, if there is a case where the previous warnings have been handled poorly, are you able to rectify this down the line to dismiss?
If they've got live warnings on file and they have not appealed those warnings, then you may build on that to get to their dismissal. If they have appealed and it's all been held badly, then it's a pack of cards that falls down. But your argument could be, we erred on procedure, we gave you a final written warning that's currently live and on file. You didn't appeal it, so therefore you must agree with it, and therefore we're going to build on that to get to a dismissal. Okay.
Thanks, Carl. Right, we've got time for just a couple more questions, so I'll run through a few more. The next question is, if an employer wishes to dismiss an employee with under 2 years service, do they have to follow the ACAS process, or is that simply a recommendation?
It's a recommendation. Legally, you don't have to do it because to get to tribunal, they've got to have 2 years service. So if they've less than 2 years service and you do a short service dismissal, still establish facts, but literally it can be done in half a day. Can the dismissal? Probably not even that. They would argue it's unfair. You've not followed the ACAS guide. The only people to tell you that you've messed up are an employment judge, and they'll never get that far. So less than 2 years service, if it's in your handbook, you can have a really shortened procedure. More than 2 years service, please don't kind of get off the beaten ACAS guide.
Thank you, Carl.
Okay.
The next question is, what happens if there is more than one issue, i.e. attendance and misconduct? Can they be joined together on the same investigation?
Yes, they've got to be rolled up together. So instead of 2 little disciplinaries, you have 1 big disciplinary. What you can't do, or this is what the law says, is leapfrog issues. Okay, so you discipline a guy on Monday for poor attendance, give him a written warning. You discipline a guy for lateness on Wednesday, so you give him a final written warning. You can't do that. Well, you can do that, it's your business, but in the eyes of the law, they've got to be pushed together, 1 investigation over both issues, 1 disciplinary over both issues, and 1 outcome over both issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Right, we'll go for the last 2 questions now. So one person has picked up on you mentioning about meetings being recorded. So they've asked, from an employer's perspective, are you able to record the meeting so that you have that for notes purposes if you want to refer back to it at any point?
Yeah, indeed. We live in a world of smartphones now, and everybody's got one in their pocket that can make audio recordings. Minute takers can miss things. Minute takers can not hear things. So at the start of the meeting, you just say, I'd like to make an audio recording of this meeting. Do you agree? And the answer nearly always is yes. Then just say a copy of this recording will be made available to you. So sometimes there's no need for a minute taker at all.
Thanks. And this will be the last question, and it's another one about recordings. So the question is, can you state during the meeting that that you do not give permission for it to be recorded and get confirmation that no recording devices are being used?
You can ask that, and you can get your employee, but typically if you're in a serious situation, a person capable of gross misconduct is also capable of lying. So the golden rule is, even though they've confirmed they're not recording, even though you've asked them not to record, work on the principle that you're being recorded. And they are, by the way, admissible in tribunal, which means they can be heard by a judge. So I've said it before, there's nothing off the record. Okay, thank you, Hannah.
Thanks, Carl, and thank you for answering all those questions. That was really useful. So before we do finish the session today, I have one ask of you all. We've been planning out our webinar programme for the remainder of the year, and in October we'll be running a webinar on maternity leave regulations. And ahead of this, we've launched a survey. The survey looks at how UK businesses are handling maternity leave and also paternity leave. So my ask of you is whether you would be able to complete this survey, and we will be sharing the findings in the webinar that's taking place in October. It only takes 2 or 3 minutes to complete, and you will also be entered into a prize draw with the chance of winning a £50 Amazon voucher. So when I send out the email today with a copy of the slides and also a recording of the webinar, I'll include a link to the survey. And like I say, we really do appreciate it if you can complete this. And I think that the findings will be quite insightful when we do have the webinar in October. One final thing to flag to you is our Knowledge Centre. I'm sure lots of you have been on there before. It's on our website and you can navigate to it from the main menu on the home page. There's all sorts of useful resources in there, upcoming webinars. You can listen to previous webinar recordings, there's guides, there's blogs, everything's free to download. So do go and have a look in there if you haven't done so already. One final thing, we are always striving to improve our services, so we'd love to hear your thoughts on today's webinar. As you leave the session, a very short survey will appear on your screen, and we'd really appreciate it if you could take 2 minutes to complete that. So that's everything from us this morning. Thank you very much to everyone who has joined and also to everyone that asked a question. We do hope that you found the session useful, and thank you very much to Carl for hosting this morning. You've been fantastic as always.
Thank you, and I wish everybody a good day.
Thank you, everyone. Like I say, I'll be following up later today with the slides and also recording, and I will now close the webinar. Thank you very much.